back at City and State TV. We're going to continue our interviews with people who are actually traveling to the Republic of Cuba, and they'll be there soon for, I think it's almost a week. One of those traveling on this cultural educational exchange is Dr. Luis O. Reyes, who I have known and is known to the education community in New York State, in the United States, in New York City, a native New Yorker, I guess you could call him, via Puerto Rico, but nacido en Puerto Rico. Puerto Rican who's been here forever and is part of the educational system. In academia, Dr. Luis Reyes, you know the educational system. I think of all the people that I saw, the 40-odd people that are actually there, with all due respect to them, you've seen the different range from the educational system of the public school system when it was the Board of Education. You were a member of that. You've participated in panels. You've studied education. This is your area of specialty. You're still in there at the college level, university level. Why are you going to Cuba, and is it the first time?
Actually, Harrison, it'll be the second time. In 1984, I was able to participate in a conference in Cuba on the condition of people of color in the United States. Imagine that.
In 84?
In 84, invited by Casa Las Americas, I believe, a conference, and I was able to present, along with many other people, African American, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Native American. So we had to go all the way to Cuba to be able to talk about what was happening to our children here in the United States.
At that point, the Board of Education was still in place, right?
Yes.
And it was still, Ed Koch was just, in 1984, you had Ed Koch. You still had, at least his policies there. And we were going through the transitions. At that point, your curiosity in the Cuban educational system and the inclusion factor, which I think we're still dealing with, what was different from the educational system in New York that you had to go to Cuba for this particular reason? And what is still happening here in New York that you see that's lacking and we can learn something from the Cuban educational system, who, by the way, has been reformed several times? It isn't like Cuba has got the perfect formula. They keep tweeting it and perfecting it.
Well, the interest that I had at the time was being able to talk about the dropout crisis among Puerto Ricans in various cities in the United States. Through my work with Aspida, I was able to analyze and talk about some of the things that needed to be done. In Cuba, what was interesting is that we were able to visit schools, including the La Escuela Lenin, where we got to see how education of a very high caliber was being offered to Cuban youth, and the fact that in the education that they were getting, they were learning about capitalism as well as about communism and socialism. So they were learning different economic systems, whereas our own children in the U.S., especially Puerto Rican and children in New York, were not learning about different systems of government. And
have you found that the fear of teaching a full scope of what's available in terms of different economies, whether it be a socialist economy, a communist economy, a capitalist economy, why is it that we think, are we that insecure in the United States about capitalism, and that's the only thing we teach as the the wherewithal and the only thing that's available as a way of economic stability?
Well, just like we're a country that believes monolingualism is natural as opposed to being bilingual, so thinking that there's just one real good government system, and that is a capitalist system, without being critical about it or even analytical and understanding of the nature of capitalism. That's one of the faults of our school system. I'm concerned even more basically today that with the focus on reading scores and math scores, on high-stakes tests, that learning about social studies, never mind economics, and history is very lacking. and languages as well. And so that the narrowing of the curriculum at a time that globalization requires us to understand not just economic systems, but climate and all kinds of things that affect the planet and the life that we're living, and the peoples that we have to deal with, whether it's in trade or in competition for jobs. We have children coming and young people coming to the universities from China as well as other countries to get an education here, and yet we think that we don't need to give an education, a free education, to all children who are in the United States, and that's one of the affects people of color most, that we end up being caught in community colleges only, and not seeing community colleges as a step towards a full college degree and a BA, MA, and knowing that future jobs are going to require people who are very well credentialed and very knowledgeable and skillful in science and engineering and medicine.
Dr. Reyes, one of the things that I know for a fact that you mentioned that you went in 1985, 84, in the 80s, middle 80s, because you saw a need. You're going back now. It's 2015. We've elected a new government in composition at the municipal government, which not only the mayor, but also the majority of the city council with a progressive wing, alleged progressive wing. We've been around long enough to know that we've seen all these kinds of labels. If in fact this is a progressive government at the municipal level of New York, I know that you see the need as an educator to take that second trip on this cultural educational exchange. Is it time for the city council to go beyond their own limitations? I mean, we got Governor Cuomo, for God's sakes, who I think is true and true a capitalist. His only interest is developing a free trade agreement. Nothing wrong with that, but that's his focus. But yet, we have at the city council a progressive government who hasn't even talked about Cuba in the context of, it's coming from the White House, normalization, or the at least the path to normalization with the Republic of Cuba, and yet we don't hear it. Do you find that strange? Because I know you've seen different types of administrations with different labels, with different occupants of City Hall. Do you have a take on that, or is it too premature to even analyze that?
Well, it's Saturday today, March 28th. Parents, teachers, students have been out in front of the governor's office marching and rallying against his education reform agenda, which basically does not provide sufficient funding for the schools, is trying to undermine the unions that protect students as well as teachers. And so maybe the governor should make sure that he visits our schools here in New York
before he goes to Cuba.
Before he goes to Cuba, and learns from the teachers, from the parents, and from the educators, including administrators, who are still waiting for the billions of dollars that were promised after a lawsuit in 1993. And that Governor Spitzer was beginning to pay down in an agreement with the plaintiffs and the legislature, but which stopped in 2009. So there are billions of dollars that are owed in New York.
And specifically, you're talking about campaign for fiscal equity.
Equity, and that was supposed to be about smaller class size, training of teachers, providing programs for English language learners, bilingual programs, and we've seen them under the previous administration in the city, under Bloomberg, dismantled these programs. So there's a lot of good work that's being done by the new administration, and I give credit to Mayor de Blasio and Carmen Farina, the chancellor, universal pre-K and after-school programs and community schools. But you build on people's culture, on their community, and on their language. And so if anybody's going to go to Cuba, what I want them to learn is to see children starting in the early years learning their own language, their own history, their own culture, and learning other languages. So bilingual education, that's a natural in most Latin American countries, in most European countries. It should be natural for us who consider ourselves leaders of the free world.
All I have to say goodbye at City and State TV, in Spanish, Governor Cuomo, since you are going to Cuba, chúpate esa la que te mandamos la otra. Luis Reyes with Herson Borrero for City and State TV. We'll be right back. Thank you, Dr. Reyes.